Welcome to the podcast of our Exile project, an initiative co-funded by the European Union bringing together universities, organizations, and communities to create innovative educational solutions and support systems for students in crisis situations. Through our stories and inspirations, we aim to build a more inclusive and supportive academic environment. Tune in and join us.
Welcome to this episode of the Exile podcast series. I'm your host, Valentina Ivanova, and today we're diving into the important topic of ensuring inclusive education for students in exile. With our guest, Boriana Marinova, we are going to discuss what we as educators can do to make our classes more accessible and more inclusive for all students regardless of their background or abilities. Boriana is one of the authors and leading editor of the Exile recommendation guide on how to adopt pedagogy, and she is going to help us understand and be better prepared to support students in exile, mainly in the field of inclusivity. So welcome, Boriana. Let's start by highlighting the main barriers and challenges exiled students face in the classroom.
So, the language barrier is definitely the biggest issue for students who come to the classroom and are supposed to follow lessons in a language they don't know well. This might be the language of the host country where they follow classes, or English, or another language of instruction. These students naturally can struggle to understand the content of their lessons, to participate in the classroom activities, and eventually to perform properly during the assessment. These become even more difficult if the lecturer speaks in the local dialect or in a very big lecture hall or uses a mic if teaching online. Also, the use of specialized academic terminology is another significant challenge. As you know, fields such as medicine, engineering, law, they have a very specialized vocabularies that even the native speakers have some time and effort to learn and to master. But for the non-native speakers, encountering these terms for the first time in a lecture without proper context or further explanation can lead to misunderstanding, confusion, even frustration. As a result, by the time the student can process one term, the lecture has moved on and the student is left behind.
I understand. And what about the interactions in the classroom?
Yes, this is another challenge because, of course, classroom interactions are very important for the learning process. And then, when the students don't understand each other very well, they can be hesitant even to speak because, of course, the exiled students, they don't know the language well, as I said, and they are worried to speak because probably they don't have the vocabulary or they are afraid that they could be misunderstood or that they cannot make themselves clear enough. So this, of course, is a barrier for them. On the other side, the local students tend to use their language because for them it's easier and faster to communicate with each other. And this is naturally also another barrier for the exiled students. So at the end, they might end up only listening and agreeing with what the majority of the students say without being able to show what they know or to express their opinion. Also, if they are expected to work in a group project, and if there is no clear distribution of the roles in advance, they might end up with a bit more peripheral tasks like printing or preparing slides, because naturally the more language intensive tasks are taken by the more confident and more efficient student. So at the end, this leads to even learning opportunities and unfair grade. Of course, it is very important here to note that these barriers are also for all international students, not only for exile students. But in the case of the exiled students, the problems are much more intensified, and the negative effect is much more intensified because they don't have only the language barriers, but they have some other problems like psychological, financial, housing, administrative problems, legal issues, and so on.
And what would be then some practical tips which can make the classroom more inclusive and accessible and would give better opportunities to students in exile to get involved and perform better?
Well, there is a lot we can do. And of course, it can be both at the individual level of the teacher and at the institutional level of the university. The easiest what we can do as educators is to adapt our language because we can just try to use a bit more common or understandable words, to articulate a bit more clearly, to speak slightly slower or louder than usual, to introduce some pauses so students get the opportunity to ask questions, or we can just ask if they have understood what we have just explained. We can also use scaffolding for
And,
tailored support.
and what would be scaffolding in this context?
Well, scaffolding in this context is just to try to provide some support, like lecture outlines in advance, to write some keywords or terms or important names on the board, to use visual aids, graphs, diagrams, tables, and so on. And also, what appears to help a lot is to prepare glossaries of the specialized terms, especially in the academic and very specialized vocabulary I was talking about. So we can prepare these glossaries by using some simple and understanding language to explain the terminology. We can also prepare some translation in English or another common language. And of course, we shouldn't forget about the using digital tools, as we all already use quite a lot. But in the case of supporting the language understanding of exiled students, digital tools can help a lot with providing simultaneous translation or any other support.
I believe they're integrated in some of the platforms like Moodle.
Yes, yes, in many cases, such tools, digital tools, they are quite available for us as teachers to use. We just need to remind ourselves to use them more often. What else? Of course, using interaction. So trying to interact with the student as much as possible. And to do this, we can use discussions, we can assign projects or some role play assignments or some other interactive techniques that require group work. Because by using interactivity, we help the student to actually connect the new information to their existing knowledge. And also, we as teachers can better assess if the students understood the material, the learning content, or we need to help them additionally. Also, we can facilitate the group work between the students. So, like this, they can practice the language better and also explain the terminology to each other and practice it, which not only helps them learn, but also helps them build social connections. Because by working cooperatively, they work together and they also reduces the feeling of isolation. Also, we can be more open and empathic to our students. Of course, this relies on the soft skills of the instructor and they need to be built, but this helps to better understand the students. Of course, we don't need to have some special treatment or easier conditions for the students because at the end of the day, they won't like it. they want to be treated as independent and capable individuals.
Yeah.
But by showing awareness, by being attentive and also willing to engage in dialogue, is definitely going to help them. This means that we need to make ourselves a bit more accessible and available to the students, either face to face or online. And most importantly, we need to be sincere and genuine in our interest to their problems and to their well-being, so they are supported and encouraged to actually talk and to accept our help.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And what about the institutional level?
Well, at the institutional level, the university can organize the so-called bridging programs or orientation module. Such programs are usually organized at the beginning before the students are enrolled in their study program, and they help them in different ways. So these orientation models or bridging programs could be language courses, for example, to help them acquire or improve the language of the country where they study or English. They also can cover academic fundamentals for the program that they are going to study, or some general study skills like research techniques, academic writing. And finally, but very importantly, orientation and integration activities such as sessions on cultural adaptation, introduction to university services, and interactions with the local students and faculty.
You just mentioned cultural adaptation, meaning that cultural differences could be another key challenge to tackle when ensuring inclusivity for students in exile, right?
Yes, definitely, because cultural differences are inevitable, and the different students learn and react in the classroom in different ways. And this is very often based on their cultural background. For example, we know very well that some students are very open and straightforward, very low vocal, and ask questions, interrupt, express their opinion, disagree, agree, and so on, while other students coming from different culture are quite close, hierarchical. They often call you sir, madam. They
Yeah.
don't dare to interrupt. They don't dare to ask a question. So, of course, these differences require adaptation and customization to the approach, so these students can be included in the learning process.
Mhm.
And to promote their active participation, we need to know who they are and also to try to integrate them. Another side of the story is the local students, who are in this
Okay.
case a dominant culture, and they are the majority. And because they are the majority, they might be reluctant to interact with the minority of the international students, because of course they don't need to learn about the new culture. They don't need to immerse themselves in another culture. While at the same time, the international students, and particularly the students in exile, they have the need to adapt. They need to learn the culture, and as a result, often they form their own international communities, and they even avoid speaking with the locals. So this brings a sort of segregation and
Oh.
reluctance to learn about each other, which in a way is not helpful. It might even prevent the work together if they need to work together for a common project or a group work. So we as educators need to try to support this intercultural interaction and to establish dialogue and collaboration between the different cultural groups. And of course, here we can use some different approaches like role-playing games, like introduction to the culture, learning for the culture, and different. There are different techniques that can be used here.
And what about the tacit norms?
Well, this is also another side the story, because when the local students come to the university, they come with their background knowledge about their own culture. They can understand the readings. They can understand the examples. They can live in the used case studies because it's based on their culture, while for students in exile, this might be another challenge because they come to a new culture, to a new country. And in some cases, even the academic expectations could be unknown for them. They might not know how to write a text in using the academic standards of the university they are in. So this might be very problematic for them. And this tacit cultural knowledge, you cannot learn it just by attending classes and learning the material. You need to be immersed in the culture, both the national and the academic. So in such context, an important skill of the instructor is to be able to adapt the material, the assignments, even the own teaching style, then rather than using just a one size fits all approach. And one way to do this is actually to use the previous knowledge of the students. We can ask them suggest topics. We can ask them to recommend reading material, even if it's from their own countries. Hopefully, not in their language if we don't know the language, of course, but this can be used. They can also suggest guest lecturers. And also, we need to be very clear what type of assignment we expect from them to do, what type of text, what type of literature they can use, so they don't get confused and lost in the culture.
Often the instructors are unaware of these specific challenges faced by the students in exile, or they do not understand the impact of cultural differences on the way students learn and behave in the classroom. And maybe sometimes they may unintentionally create barriers by speaking too quickly or expecting students to be active in the classroom, asking too many questions, expressing opinions. What can be done, Boriana? What can be done so teachers are better prepared to work in multilingual and multicultural classrooms?
Well, it's a very typical answer, but it is needed and it helps a lot. So the institution needs to offer training to the teachers and also resources on inclusive teaching practices, language aware pedagogy, and cultural responsiveness. It is very important to realize that actually the teacher is not only teaching the subject, actually it is teaching the language which is linked to this subject. So in a way, all university teachers are also language teachers because they need to teach the terminology which goes with the subject. And in this respect, being trained in language aware pedagogy can help them to be aware, to also try to understand the linguistic resources of their students, but also the practices that can be used to support the language in the classroom. And of course, the visibility and the effectiveness of this training increase when it is implemented under the umbrella of professional development as whole institution approach to supporting diversity and inclusion, because when it is as the form of professional development, the teachers can get their recognition. The training is recognized for their professional development, and of course, it's an important motivation for them to follow this training. Otherwise, they might just skip it. But yes, this is important that they are trained in clear communication, in cultural responsive teaching, and in handling multilingual classroom.
So it is important to train the teachers, to promote the lifelong learning in practice for our own faculty members, and to have the institutional support.
Definitely, definitely. And as I mentioned, it should be as a professional development program. So it can be recognized.
Okay, thank you. And at the end of our discussion, what would be one lesson learned from you to share with us from Excel?
Well, exactly based on what I just said, this is the effectiveness of the structured pathways, the need for the institutional approach, for the institutionalization of what is done at the university level, the institutional ownership, because often it starts as a project, but we know that project-based solutions sometimes can live shortly because they just end at the end of the project and at the end of the funding. While if there is decision and a strategy at the institutional level, strategy for internationalization, social responsibility, inclusion, this strategy actually defines targets, defines the resources, the measures, and importantly, the funding. So this is the most important lessons learned I can share.
Thank you very much, Boriana, for sharing your valuable insights with us today. It is clear that creating more inclusive and supportive classroom is very important for the integration of displaced students and, of course, for their academic success. It is also clear that the effects are greater when actions are strategically defined and coordinated at the institutional level. So the support of the institution is really crucial for the faculty and for the students and for the expected results. We hope today's discussion inspired meaningful action and change. Please find more information about the Exile project on our website, exile-project.org, and follow us on LinkedIn to stay updated and listen to more of our podcast. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Boriana.
Thank you.